For most of the 20th century, the V8 belonged to America. It wasn't just an engine configuration, it was an identity. 8 cylinders meant freedom, rebellion, excess. It meant Detroit. From drag strips to drive-ins, the V8 wasn't something you engineered quietly, it was something you announced loudly. Power was supposed to be felt, heard, and seen. And because of that, no one was watching for a threat that didn't behave like one. In the late 20th century, when Americans thought about competition, they imagined regulations tightening, fuel crises returning, or horsepower numbers shrinking year by year. The danger, they believed, would come from outside forces trying to kill the V8 altogether. What they didn't expect was something far more unsettling. A company halfway across the world, known not for passion, not for muscle, but for appliances on wheels, was quietly building a V8 of its own. No racing heritage, no muscle car lineage, no intention of joining the horsepower wars that Detroit had dominated for decades. At the time, Japanese cars were defined by what they weren't. They weren't fast. They weren't emotional. They weren't aspirational. They were efficient, sensible, and forgettable. Perfect transportation, nothing more. Which is exactly why no one paid attention. This wasn't an engine built to win races or break records. It wasn't designed to revive a golden age or fuel nostalgia. It wasn't even meant to be talked about. It was engineered in near silence, with goals that had nothing to do with quarter-mile times or magazine covers. And that's what made it dangerous. Because while Detroit was protecting tradition, someone else was questioning assumptions. While American manufacturers refined what already existed, this engine was designed as if nothing before it mattered. No one announced its arrival. No one framed it as a challenge. There were no burnouts, no muscle badges, no bravado. Yet, for a brief moment, almost unnoticed, American muscle was closer to being replaced than it had ever been. And the engine responsible wasn't trying to compete at all. For decades, Detroit believed the V8 was untouchable. The confidence wasn't baseless. American manufacturers had invented the formula, perfected it, and wrapped it in mythology. The sound, the torque, the attitude, all of it pointed back to the same place. And that confidence shaped decisions across the industry. At Ford Motor Company, General Motors, and Chrysler, the V8 wasn't treated as a problem to solve. It was treated as a legacy to preserve. Engineers were asked to modernize without changing character, to meet emissions rules without rewriting the formula, and to keep costs down by refining architectures that already existed. That approach worked until it didn't. Through the late 70s and 80s, compromises piled up. Power dropped, complexity increased, and reliability quietly suffered. But none of this felt existential. The assumption was simple, even weakened. An American V8 was still better than anything an outsider could build. So progress slowed. Radical redesigns felt unnecessary. Incremental updates became the norm. Familiar castings, familiar layouts, familiar thinking. And culturally, the audience reinforced it. Muscle fans didn't demand precision or longevity. They wanted heritage, noise, and names they already trusted. Nostalgia sold better than reinvention. What Detroit missed wasn't a lack of talent or effort. It was the danger of believing ownership meant permanence. While America guarded what the V8 had been, it stopped asking what the V8 could become. And that blind spot, subtle, comfortable, and widely shared, left the door open. Just long enough for a rival to walk through unnoticed and change everything forever. Japan was never supposed to be part of this story. When American enthusiasts pictured V8 power, they imagined Detroit iron, not a country associated with compact sedans, fuel economy, and restraint. In the global car hierarchy of the time, Japan occupied a very specific lane, and 8 cylinders were not in it, which is why what happened next felt almost forbidden. Inside Toyota, a small group of engineers was given an unusual mandate: build a V8 from scratch. No racing program, no marketing spectacle, no heritage to protect. The goal wasn't domination, it was proof. Proof that Toyota could match and quietly exceed the best engineering standards in the world. This engine was designed backwards from most performance projects. Instead of asking how much power it could make, engineers asked how long it could last. Instead of chasing sound or aggression, they prioritized balance, smoothness, and tolerance. Every component was overbuilt. Every stress point was treated as unacceptable. Durability targets stretched far beyond industry norms, not for bragging rights, but because failure was not an option. Refinement became an obsession. Vibration was hunted relentlessly. Noise was engineered out. Even internal components were finished to standards most engines never see. This wasn't excess, it was discipline. And the strangest part was intent. This engine was never meant to replace American muscle. It wasn't designed to change culture or steal identity. It was built to live under a luxury hood, unseen and unquestioned, doing its job flawlessly for years. Which makes the irony unavoidable. By refusing to chase performance glory, Toyota created something far more disruptive. A V8 so robust, so precise, and so quietly capable that its true potential remained hidden. For now. And few realized they were witnessing the beginning of a challenge nobody had prepared for. At all times, the engine didn't arrive with smoke, noise, or spectacle. It arrived quietly, under the hood of a full-size luxury sedan, the Lexus LS 400, rolling smoothly into a market that wasn't prepared to understand what it was experiencing. No burnouts, no drag strip credentials, no muscle car badge. Just silence, balance, and an unsettling sense that something fundamental had shifted. From behind the wheel, the difference was immediate. The V8 didn't shake the car at idle. It didn't announce itself with vibration or mechanical drama. Power arrived cleanly, evenly, and without effort. Acceleration felt inevitable rather than aggressive, as if the engine was barely aware it was working at all. That refinement wasn't cosmetic. Underneath, the engineering discipline was unlike anything American buyers had encountered in a production V8. Internal balance was obsessive. Tolerances were tight. Rotational smoothness was prioritized in ways that traditional muscle engines never attempted. The result was an engine that could make competitive power while feeling almost detached from the act of making it. Longevity became part of the experience. Owners weren't talking about rebuilds or quirks. They talked about mileage, 6 figures, then more. The engine didn't just perform well, it refused to wear out in the way people expected V8s to do. And that was the contradiction. Here was one of the most advanced V8s of its era, not wrapped in nostalgia or rebellion, but hidden inside a luxury car meant to glide through traffic unnoticed. It didn't flex, it didn't posture, it didn't need to. For American enthusiasts, the discomfort was subtle but real. This engine suggested that power didn't have to be crude, and strength didn't require sacrifice. It challenged the idea that refinement diluted performance. Instead, it implied the opposite. At first, the reputation spread quietly. Owners talked, mechanics noticed, engineers paid attention. And then a different group began to look closer. Because once enthusiasts realized what Toyota had built, the story was no longer confined to luxury sedans, and the real implications were only just beginning. The engine was never supposed to leave its lane. It was designed to live a quiet life, sealed under a luxury hood, serviced on schedule, and forgotten between oil changes. But engines don't stay contained forever. Eventually, the wrong people noticed the right details. And that's when everything changed. Independent builders, tuners, and racers began pulling the engine apart, not to admire its refinement, but to test its limits. What they found didn't match expectations. The internals were stronger than they needed to be. The bottom end was rigid. The tolerances were tight. This wasn't a V8 built with just enough strength to survive a warranty period. It was built to endure abuse it was never meant to see. So they started abusing it. Boost was added, then more. RPM limits climbed. Applications grew stranger. The engine found its way into drift cars, endurance races, off-road builds, and swaps that made no sense on paper. And instead of failing, it adapted. Where many American V8s demanded reinforcement before serious modification, this one accepted punishment as if it had been expecting it all along. That's when the reputation shifted. This was no longer just a luxury experiment. It became an underground constant, a motor people trusted when reliability mattered more than image. Stories spread quietly through forums and garages. Engines running hard for years without teardown. Builds surviving conditions they weren't designed for. Abuse replacing marketing as proof. But something strange happened. Despite having the credentials, despite the results, the engine never crossed fully into mainstream American muscle culture. It didn't headline dyno charts. It didn't become a symbol. It remained a tool, respected, used, and rarely celebrated. And that disconnect is the key. American muscle has always been about more than capability. It's about belonging, about sound, story, and lineage. This engine had none of that. It didn't sound right, it didn't look familiar, and it didn't come from the right place. So it lived in the shadows, doing the work without taking the credit. Which makes the truth harder to ignore. If this engine could survive what enthusiasts threw at it, without the cultural support, without the marketing, without the mythology, what would have happened if it had been embraced instead of overlooked? That question lingered, and the answer explains why the takeover never came. The engine didn't lose, it simply didn't belong. That distinction matters because what stopped the takeover had nothing to do with metallurgy or math. American muscle has never been a spreadsheet exercise. It's a culture built on sound, attitude, and defiance. Power is supposed to announce itself. Identity is supposed to be unmistakable. And history is supposed to be loud. The Japanese V8 challenged all of that by accident. It was too quiet, too polite, too disciplined. Its strength was expressed through restraint, not rebellion. It proved that precision could coexist with power. But that idea collided with everything American muscle represented. Enthusiasts didn't just buy engines. They bought lineage, stories, and the feeling of belonging to something inherited. Branding sealed the divide. The engine was never positioned as a challenger, never framed as a statement, never sold as a threat. Toyota didn't ask permission to redefine muscle, and American buyers never offered it. They weren't looking for a new definition. They were protecting an old one. So the engine remained an outsider, respected but not embraced, admired but not adopted. And that's the paradox at the heart of the story. The most capable V8 doesn't automatically become the most loved. The best solution doesn't always replace the familiar one. Cultural ownership can matter more than technical superiority. The threat faded not because it failed, but because accepting it would have required letting go of something else. What survived wasn't a takeover, it was a lesson. And Detroit, quietly, was paying attention. Detroit didn't lose the V8, but it didn't walk away unchanged either. In the years that followed, American engines began to evolve in subtle but unmistakable ways. Reliability targets improved. Refinement mattered more. Balance, efficiency, and durability became part of the conversation, not afterthoughts. The global benchmark had shifted, and pretending it hadn't was no longer an option. The Japanese V8 never conquered American muscle. It never replaced it. Instead, it haunted it. Like a shadow competitor, it existed as proof of what was possible when tradition didn't dictate design. It showed that strength didn't have to be crude, and that longevity could be engineered, not hoped for. Even without mainstream acceptance, its influence lingered in the background, quietly shaping expectations. That's why this story isn't about defeat. It's almost. Almost all stories matter because they expose vulnerabilities without rewriting history. They show where things could have gone, and why they didn't. This engine didn't change the culture outright, but it forced it to look in the mirror. Today, American V8s are still here, still loud, still emotional, still unmistakably themselves. But they are better than they used to be. And somewhere inside that improvement lives the legacy of an engine that never needed to shout, never needed to win, and never needed permission to matter. It didn't replace American muscle. It made sure American muscle couldn't stay the same.